Comics Are Dope is brought to you by the greatest shop in the world, my LCS, Fight or Flight Comics. And no, I'm not biased at all. They have a great selection of everything from new weekly comics to back issues, rare variants and statues and collectibles. They've got all sorts of stuff. And if you really want to follow what's going on, you got to follow them on Instagram. That way you can see when they get new collections in, when their latest signing or in-store events are, and what's in stock. So check out Fight or Flight Comics in Raleigh, North Carolina in the Triangle Town Center Mall and tell them BJ Kicks sent you. Now, let's start the show. And welcome back to another audio edition of Comics Are Dope, the podcast. I am your host, BJ Kicks, and I'm here to present to you a conversation with comic book writer Curt Pires, who you may know from his series Indigo Children over at Image, or his string of Comixology originals. Now he is back at Image with a brand new title. It's called Lost Fantasy, and it is out this coming Wednesday, April 30th. So we're going to talk about Lost Fantasy, some of the inspiration behind that series, and why he felt like fantasy sort of needed to be redefined in 2025. And we talk about a lot of fun things, including sneakers. And so I'll go ahead and get started with this conversation with Curt Pires. So normally I like to start these off with, an intro. I like to read a bio and give you guys a bit of a sense of, who it is we have sitting in the guest chair. But I figured this time around, I would just introduce you the way I was introduced. So I'm going to flash back to October 2024. I am in New York City for New York Comic Con, and I was invited to a private event hosted by Amazon for Comixology Unlimited, just kind of promoting some of their books, upcoming books that were coming out, as well as some trade paperback collections of previous Comixology Originals series. And so we're in this room full of a who's who of comic book creators. Scott Snyder, Chip Zdarsky's there. I was sitting at a table with Alex Segura and Jamal Igle, and we're going through, and it's almost like watching the Apple keynote, and it's like everybody comes up and talks a little bit about their upcoming comic and what went into it, and it was cool. It was a nice little pitch. Now, fun fact: this was my first time going to any sort of industry event or anything like that, so I was just kind of a fly on the wall, super shy. I'm not talking to anyone, right? But at one point, this guy walks out and he's wearing a pair of Amam and Year Jordan 3s. And for, I guess, most of you guys watching or listening to this, like I'm speaking French. Well, I'm literally speaking French, but also it's like, what are you talking about? But Amam and Year is like a designer brand. They actually founded their flagship store in Atlanta, but the guys from Pittsburgh. The point is, it's one of those limited sneaker boutique type things. And I'm like, okay, the two of us might be the only people in the room that know what these sneakers are. Who is that guy and what is his book about? And that was my introduction to tonight's guest, Mr. Curt Pires. How are you today, sir?
Good, thanks for having me. Yeah, we bonded over the sneakers. You're right, probably the only two people in that room who who know anything about that.
Right. So I've got to ask, right now, how long have you been into sort of sneaker culture, and was that a one-off thing, or how'd that go for you?
No, I've been into sneakers probably since about a decade, like 2016 probably. Uh and yeah, I got really sucked in by the first sort of like Yeezy V2s when it was like, you know, a long time ago when it was the hardest sneaker to get and all this stuff, and they're, all this craziness around them. And so I spent way too much money shipping a pair of the Oreo Yeezys from Stadium Goods in New York to Canada where I live, because there wasn't this was kind of the start of really the online sneaker hype beast explosion thing, right? So it wasn't like stores everywhere like there is now where you could get them. So I shipped that, and then from there I got into Jordans, all these sort of other sneakers. And now I sort of I buy less sneakers than I used to, but I still like when something really good comes out where it feels sort of special and is a good sneaker, I'll go after it. And so that sneaker we were talking about is an example of it where I felt like the whole package and all the Amanier stuff is really like incredibly designed from, like the box to the insole to everything. And so to bring it back to comics a bit, the same thing I look for in a good sneaker is the same thing I like in a good comic, where it's really intentionally created and designed from sort of start to finish, right? And so in the sneaker, they create the whole unboxing experience, and they're sort of putting a lot of effort into that. And then in the comic, it's like for working on, Lost Fantasy, which is the image book. I'm sort of here shilling to your loyal listeners. I wanted to make something that was from staple to staple, felt like special and sort of more than just like comic you read and sort of throw on the floor or something, right?
For sure. And it's funny because if you got into sneakers in like 2016, you were in that period right after they started giving all the sneakers a name as opposed to a colorway, right? So like one famous pair of Jordans, like the shattered backboards, and they tell the story about Jordan playing this game in Italy and breaking the backboard. He just happened to be wearing like a black and orange jersey, and so on. And since then, and all the way up through now, right? Like the storytelling aspect has been what people have latched onto in the world of sneakers. And I think that is a perfect segue into who you are. When we look into Curt Pires, right, like the through line is absolutely stories, right? You've got projects in development for film and television. You've got several comic projects under your belt, and seems to be no sign of slowing down anytime soon. I guess my question for you is, what is it about storytelling that drew you in and made you feel like I got to do that?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. I don't know. It's kind of you're asking the question of like why do people like storytelling, which is pretty much impossible to answer in a in a fully developed way. But I think what people like about storytelling and what draws me to it was noticing that the emotion you can feel watching a movie or reading a really good comic or something like that, and then sort of a desire to evoke that emotion or connect with people through the work. And I think uh the longer I've been doing it, the more I kind of realize the value of storytellers is that we give people uh a way to process their feelings and sort of escapism as well, right? I know there's certain things when I'm just having a rough time or a bad day that I definitely find like comfort food, right? And then I will watch. And so I think almost like I think we're storytellers are kind of provide a service to humanity, right?
Hmm. Yeah, for
Like
sure.
in the least egotistical way of saying that. I'm not trying to say like, oh, we're so important, all this stuff. I'm trying to say like, uh, it's just humans need stories, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think stories give us a way to understand the world around us. Like it's fun. I guess like growing up, the first you really get of that is like nursery rhymes, right? Like Oh Mother Goose and like the Little Red Riding Hood and um what's the other one? The Big Red Hen or something like that. Some kind of hen. But the point is we learn these stories and there's all these morals to all these stories. And it's like these stories, one, teach us how to interact with the world, but also give us things to identify with, like even stories like the ugly duckling and stuff like that, right? Like we use storytelling at its most basic level to teach kids and open kids' eyes to the experiences of other people and, teach human behavior and stuff like that. But then as we grow up, right, we're watching TV, we're going out to the movies, Some of us are reading comics, and we are opened up to this whole world, or multiple worlds. And it's like, for a second you can like live in Sacramento and be a part of like 80s skate culture. Or you can imagine a whole different world where it's like, we're raging against the oligarchy, and, maybe learning something about them that we wouldn't have considered from our tax brackets, right? Like it's really interesting, the role that stories can tell or play in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's comic books especially I think are really interesting because it's like I think of comic books kind of like records, right? Where it's like this thing that refuses to die off, even though it's not as mainstream as maybe it once was. But I think there's something really special about the medium and about the storytelling that is utilized in it that really is attractive to people and keeps people coming back because otherwise, they just wouldn't exist because certainly been so many times in history and even recent history where comics are dying, but like they're sort of so powerful in a way that they sort of refuse to go away. Uh, and I mean, there's a reason I think that comics are the sort of backbone of the biggest entertainment around. Uh, we're sort of in a moment where it's kind of declined a bit, sort of like the way the Western did, right? Where in Hollywood everything was a Western for a while, right? And they were just printing money, and then people got tired of Westerns, so they stopped making them. But sort of like the Western, I think the superhero story is sort of mythic and resonates with people in a way similar to like ancient Greek mythology or any of this stuff where you can go be Christopher Nolan and make your version of the story, and people that's thousands of years old and people still go see it.
For sure, for sure. When we're talking about comic books, right? It's true. Like comic books do feel like, uh, you know, a, a relic of an old time, or a past time, but at the same time, right? Like there's so much stuff that can only happen in a comic book, right? Like there's so many stories that we read or come across that it's like you could try to make this work, you could try to adapt this, right? Like, but maybe the CGI isn't good enough, or there's not enough special effects. There's not a the actor doesn't convey the moment the way the artist could draw it, right? And so there's so many things that just feel like they're unique to the comic medium. When did you discover comics? When did you start reading comics?
I was a kid. I was about probably 11 or 12, and I went to there's a comics. I kind of lived in the suburbs with my family, and so there wasn't really any comic stores near us because and they weren't really selling them in grocery stores at that point either. This was early 2000s. And so it's kind of like comics had kind of crashed out, right? It
Mm-hmm.
was kind of like on the comeback, I would say. And anyway, so my dad and my uncle took me and my cousin to this comic store downtown. And I got like the Jim Lee Hush, right? Uh, the Bendis Daredevil. Uh, I think I also got the Mark Wade, Mike Waringo Fantastic Four, like 25-cent issue. So like I discovered all these really amazing comics. And I was like kind of obsessed, especially with the Jim Lee stuff. Like that shit was mind blowing. Uh, even today, is still probably one of my favorite superhero artists.
For sure. Yeah, I got into comics a lot later in life. Like I was an adult working a job. I was working in a call center. And I ended up taking my daughter to a free comic book day event, and that kind of got me hooked. But there was another comic shop that was like right around the corner from my job. And one of my coworkers was really into comics. So he kind of was like my tour guide for a little bit. And what he said to me was like, all right, because I was frustrated with like some of the books I was reading. Like I felt like the art was inconsistent and it was like I didn't know what to buy. And so he's like, all right, well, if you're into Batman, cool. Uh, why not? But also, like, great comic art begins and ends with Jim Lee. Those were his words. And so that was when I learned the difference between like a single issue and a trade. So then I went to
Yeah.
the comic shop and bought the Hush trade. And that kind of hooked me and like kept me pacified until the next issue of Batman came out and I could kind of go and explore further. What was it about that book that just like really pulled you in?
Well, so Hush, I think, and it's funny this turning into a promo for Hush too, but I think so I think what's so good about that book is that A Eddie Jim Lee is like the modern master of superheroes uh, in a way that I don't know what the equivalent is. Maybe, and it's before my time, but I understand that Jorge Garcia Lopez for his time, right, was that guy, right? And
Mhm.
so every era of comics kind of has, I think, the platonic ideal of like the superhero artist. And for, the last 20 years, it's been Jim. And so I think like your friend said, the good superhero storytelling begins and ends with Jim Lee. You can draw anything. What's so good about Haj versus some of the other stuff Jim's drawn over the last 20 years is that uh, Jeff Loeb really understands Batman. He
Mhm.
understands what makes a good Batman story, right? Because at this point, he'd already done Long Halloween, Dark Victory, so it's like, okay, this is round three for him. Uh, the other, I don't count the Haunted Night one or whatever. It's just annual. Uh, for all you nerds who are gonna nitpick me watching this. Uh, but so he really understands the assignment, and but he also writes different for Jim Lee than he does for Tim Sale, right? The book is kind of tailored for Jim, where it's still this big, windy mystery, which has a lot in common with Long Halloween, but has all these crazy moments like the fight with Superman, where it's obviously pretty inspired by Dark Knight Returns, which is my other uh comic I read around that time that's an all-time favorite. Uh and so he just everyone working on that book sort of really just knocked it out of the park. I love the lettering on it too. I think it was Richard Starking's, yeah, the big title cards and spreads and stuff. It's just like really just incredible. Like the reason it's so popular, it's like, yeah, everyone really one of those moments where everyone knocked it out of the park.
For sure. I feel like Hush is one of those stories, at least among Batman fans, where it's like it's always going to end up on somebody's top five list, and then you go in and you read more stories and it might drop down your list a little bit. But I feel like Hush is like the perfect gateway comic. Like it it introduces you to how fun comics can be in such a great way.
Yeah, I feel like it's really hard to do a good Batman comic because the bar's so incredibly high, and there's been so many. It's kind of oversaturated character at this point, right? Because DC pumps out, 30 Batman books for every one Superman book they do. So it's really hard to do something interesting. But I think like Hush, uh, Dark Knight Returns, uh, Year One, and then I think The Court of Owls, uh, is probably like the top five or so. Maybe I'm forgetting some stuff, but I feel like those are the ones in my head that really stand out. And yeah, like Long Halloween and that stuff. But those ones sort of stand out to me, and I think it's tough to uh to really impress people with it because there's a lot of really down the middle quality wise Batman stuff.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, and so those first comics you got, they're all superhero comics, right? You got Batman, Daredevil, Fantastic Four. Um, but like when I go through your bibliography, so to speak, like there's a lot of different types of stories, and you've largely stayed away from big two storytelling. Has that been intentional?
No, I mean I think earlier on it was more intentional. I wasn't that interested in it early in my career, and I'd say only the last couple of years have I really come to like love superhero storytelling again, like maybe
Mm,
the last 5 years. So that's kind of that. I mean, I've certainly uh had conversations, but I just I think so. What I think, I think there's certain superhero books, and in your career you don't want to rule out anything, right? You want to be open to opportunities. I don't. What I'm not interested in doing is just hopping aboard a moving train where I can't do a good job, right? Like that's
yeah.
sort of the thing that I don't really have any interest in is just like, oh, can you write 3 fill-in issues of X-Men or this sort of thing? It's like, well, n no, not really. Like it's just I don't think I'm servicing the book or myself by doing that. But that's it. I do really like what we were talking about, these Batman books. These are all books with creators' fingerprints on them, right? And they sort of leave a stamp on it. And so I'm interested in the superheroes, and I do have, some superhero projects coming up. Especially I'm doing a book with John Romita Jr., which is like gonna blow people away. And that's a superhero book, but that's think like, Invincible or Kick-Ass, right? Where we're taking John and I own the book and
Mhm.
we're taking what we like about superhero storytelling and basically saying like my attitude towards this, and I think John's attitude as well, is like, let's make the superhero book that can go against absolute Batman, right?
Mhm.
Because like if you're doing this book, try and or do anything, try and be the best. Like don't be Z-list. And it's like, well, yeah, I know the book we're gonna do can be better than, you know, 75 or 80% of what the big two put out. But it's like, well, my thing about it was let's just go for the throne and go for the jugular. So it's like, yeah, it's like obviously that's some crazy stuff to say, but that's kind of my attitude towards it. Like, why are you gonna do something if you're not gonna do it like hardcore, right?
For
So I'm interested in superhero storytelling, and I'm doing uh a bunch of it and with some really cool collaborators in an exciting way, but I'm interested in doing stuff that I own, right? Because the thing is none of these Marvel creators, any of these guys ever got what they should have got paid on these ideas. So, and I mean, Stan Lee, the one who made out like a bandit, uh, the only one who made kind of the money he should, still died terribly, being basically abused and manhandled by, I don't even know what the fuck was going on there. Some guy who's just rolling him out to the Comic Con. So I'm interested in doing superhero storytelling, but in a way that uh where I can work with the best artists and we can all own it and co-own it and benefit the stuff, right? Uh and so that's I am doing my version of that. And then, I think once some of those books come out and they see how good they are and what my version of that superhero storytelling is when I'll be in a position to, if I want to, do a Batman graphic novel or something like that. Maybe that's when we do it, right?
yeah, yeah. That's there's a lot to consider there, right? And you've made a lot of considerations even then. When it comes to ownership, when it comes to creator rights, and of course, also when it comes to being in service to the story, right? So you mentioned like not wanting to be in a position where you can't do the story well. And I think that's certainly fair when it comes to like big two stuff. Like as a fan and like pseudo member of the press, right? Like there's plenty of times where we're reading books from month to month and it's like, oh, this feels rushed or this felt like they had to cram it into the publishing schedule. And there's a lot of times where we're like, okay, why is this book coming out now? Why couldn't they take their time or whatever? But that's just the nature of working for like a major company whose job it is to publish books. Like if the books don't come out, people don't get paid. And so it's like you might be working under duress, you might be working under like crazy deadlines and all sorts of stuff like that. Um, and those are the things that kind of battle with your ability to tell an effective story or to execute the ideas or the visions that you have well. But what I'm curious about for your side of things is, what is it that makes a good story? What are the things that maybe inspired you coming up and kind of keep your juices flowing even now?
I think what I like and what I try to deliver in a story is something that doesn't feel like you could get from another creator or something. Really good creatives have a voice, and that's sort of the thing I think we're talking about when the assembly line of comics, and there's certainly assembly line in other mediums, right? So I don't want people to think I'm being overly critical of comics,
Mhm.
but we live in a world where it would sort of become content, right? So now there's this expectation of more volume than ever before, uh, and sort of less respect, or not even about respect, but less importance placed on the idea of creatives during the ship than ever. We live it's about the IP, right?
Mhm.
And uh I think for me, I notice the stories that I really respond to are unique stories that really have someone's fingerprints on them, right? So if it's like a Quentin Tarantino movie, or the new Ryan Coogler movie that's about to come out, it's all this doesn't matter necessarily what the project or story is. It's I like something that doesn't feel like I could just go to the store and buy an exact copy of it, right? And
Mhm.
I think so that when people respond to storytelling, a lot of time that's what they respond to, right? Uh, I'm trying to think, what was well, okay, that's not the but a lot of these movies you see doing well now are movies like that, or books like that, right? Like I think Absolute Batman again, to I was doing my thinner thing earlier and say, okay, I'm gonna make the best superhero comic, but that superhero, the reason that book sells so well, and the reason all the Absolute books are doing so well, is because they all have a really clear vision, and they're all grounded. They all sort of have a mission statement. They all don't feel like they're just cookie cuttering from the assembly line, right? And
Mhm.
so like I'm reading every one of those books, and I'm kind of amazed by the quality of them, to just be totally frank, because it's like, when was the last time DC put out 5, 6 books in a row that you like can't miss, right? It doesn't really happen. And so that's what I think the the creator really is what makes stories great. And so for me, my way of how do I make something great is like I said before, really focusing on like every element of the storytelling. Obviously, the guts of the comic, the story itself is more important than the title page design. But once I've nailed that, the story in the pages, going back and making sure, okay, everything sort of informs the story, and everything, feeds into each other, sort of like like a Kubrick movie, or like even a recent movie I saw that was very much like this, was like The Brutalist, where the chapter title cards, everything's really, it all tells a story. And so I think for me, uh that's what I'm interested in, is having an idea that I'm passionate about, and making the thing with collaborators I'm passionate about, and executing it in the best way I possibly can, and just digging in, and pushing myself to reach a high level of quality. And if money was no object, I would very much just like to work on 2 or 3 things at a time, right? Because I could really take a lot more time on them. But this is a fast moving medium, and you have to you can't be too precious, right? It's like Kirby, the Kirby and the old Marvel comic stuff. They're creating these universes, which now the bedrock of this, multi-billion dollar empire, they were like knocking out 7 pages a day in a sweaty, uh, like, glorified apartment, in Manhattan. So I think it's just like, yeah, you want to do a great job. You also can't be too precious. So it's sort of, they're two different sides of the coin.
Yeah, for sure. Like you can't hold on to it, right? Like I think about we were talking about music earlier. Um, there's a documentary about one of my favorite groups, A Tribe Called Quest, and Chris Lighty, their manager at the time. There's a scene where he's talking about how he had to like just go and like snatch the album from them because it's like if left to their own devices, they would just keep tweaking songs and tweaking songs. It's like at some point you got to just say, you know what, it's done. Let's let, the market decide what they want to do with this and let the fans decide how they like it. And, thankfully for them, it turned out to be a string of classic albums. But, even if it's not like every work you do is not the classic work, it's like it's iterative. And the more at bats you get, hopefully, the better you become at it. And I think maybe the best judge of a story is like, okay, well, how well did I reach my goal in the story, right? Like, not necessarily with the commercial success of it, but like, hey, I wanted to tell a story that was suspenseful and like, did I execute it well? Maybe I should have changed like the way we introduced a character here or there, but it's like, I'm sure it gets easier, so to speak, as time goes on. Has that been your experience?
Well, I think you're right where it is about just getting up at the bat, right? Where it's sort of like the t 10,000 hours theory, where it's sort of like the more you do something, the more you achieve a sense of like mastery over it. And so like, like I've been kind of working in comics and at comics and around writing for 10 years. And I think I'm way better and faster at it than I was, 10 years ago. And I think you develop just like subconscious stuff, right? So uh like the page turns and that sort of stuff, that's something that I found like I've gotten really better over the last couple years than earlier in my career where I would not necessarily think about it as much when I'm writing. Always now I'm kind of really thinking, okay, when's the page turn? When's this? When's that? We can drop that moment on the page turn, so it's not going to be like spoiled and all this stuff, right? And so I think now just almost like all these structural like uh considerations of like the comic format and the layouts are like subconsciously like cooked into my brain in a way that they're just not when you're just starting out. So I think that's an example of like just doing something over and over again gives you this like almost subconscious knowledge of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's interesting. Like this. So my background is music. Before I was into any of this, I was just into making beats and rapping and all that. And there certainly is like a structure when it comes to songwriting. But I think in rap, like we kind of can get away with, breaking structure for a little bit, right? Like even a song like A Millie by Lil Wayne. It's like, yeah, it's got a chorus and like a hook, but it almost feels like one long verse. Um, but in like R&B or like other types of music, you've got like the verse, the chorus, a bridge, another maybe a pre-chorus. But it's like the more you learn that structure, the more you can kind of play with it and really operate in a way that's like, okay, this is the best collection of pieces arranged in just the right way to really make a masterpiece. And I think working with comics is kind of very similar. So like I've been reading The Walking Dead Deluxe, and it's cool because I wasn't around or I wasn't reading comics when the original Walking Dead came out. And so The Walking Dead Deluxe, they've been reprinting it and they'll put all these like all this back matter in there. And Kirkman's got all his scripts and but also like outlines and stuff. And he'll kind of write like a letter, kind of just explaining it. So he's explaining how he learned page turns from like Savage or I think from Todd McFarlane, but like just that same structure that you're talking about. And then he'll have like there's like bullet points where he's like, all right, a cool moment here, 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 and here. but you're reading it and it doesn't feel formulaic as you're reading it. And so I think that's just
Kind of like building a blueprint of a house is what I would say. It's more like where you got to have a good foundation,
mm,
and, and then yeah, you can add accents to the room or have get fancy with the lighting or what the marble you use and all this stuff. But it's like the blueprint has to be good. And so like when you're writing the script, you're kind of writing or devising a blueprint for it, right? And so like knowing when landing your moments on the page and stuff is just like it's just good design. I think and it's funny you mentioned music because I really think about like a lot of my someone I work with closely to with a lot was mentioned to me once the way I sort of like make a lot of old concepts and stuff fresh is sort of like the way in hip hop they cut samples, right?
mm,
And
mm.
I was kind of thinking about that, and I do think there's something to it because I think like I think this not the Lost Fantasies the first step, but this other book I'm working on, Galactic, is like it's like me cutting a sample of like the Star Wars uh and the Star Wars and Mobius comics and like True Romance, but then making it this its own crazy thing that's kind of like my own thing. And it's hard to explain until you experience it, but like I think my stuff when you read it all sort of I have a voice and my stuff has a certain feeling to it, and like whether you love it or you hate it, you read it and you could be like, okay, that was a Curt Pierce comic. And so I think that I was just thinking of that idea of like of cutting samples because yeah, I mean the person who I always think about when I'm cutting samples of somewhere, I don't want to necessarily talk too much about it. That's yay. Okay, so not doing too much into that. I don't want to touch the stove on that one, but I'm like, that's I think about that and then and you can cut this if you want, but the comics example of getting stuff out the door, but of doing a lot of stuff but trying to make it perfect. For me, the thing I'm always thinking of alongside Jack Kirby is when he did like those album every week when he was in Wyoming, and it was like
Mhm.
Pusha T album, Kanye album, Nas album, Tiana, right? It was like five albums in 5 weeks, and I'm like, they're all, pretty great, at least production wise. And so
Mhm.
I kind of I think about that sometimes a lot when I'm just like, you got to just when you're wanting to hit that level like perfectionism, but also get thing out the door. I think about, about him turning out like five albums in 5 weeks, which, you know, is objectively insane.
Yeah, an insane feat for sure. I think my favorite, not to derail this too much, I think my favorite Kanye era is the pre Dark Fantasy era, and he's doing Good Fridays. And it's like this is peak blog era. Like I'm getting all of my music from like all these underground blogs. And it's like, there's J. Cole, but there's like Currency and Wiz Khalifa and all that. And then all of a sudden, Kanye is taking over the blogs every Friday night. And sometimes it's like, is he gonna make the deadline? Like sometimes you're waiting right till like 11:59, and they're like these massive posse cuts. Some of them end up making albums, some of them don't, but it's like every week was a moment, and you could tell they were working on it like until you heard it. And yeah, there's definitely something to like working on a thing and just getting it out there. Um, but I wanted to ask you, right, like, because we can sit and talk process, or at least I can sit and talk process and inspirations and stuff all day. But I did read The Lost Fantasy, the first issue, which is out as you guys are listening to this. It'll be out this coming up Wednesday at your local comic shop from Image Comics, and you certainly should check it out. And when we're talking about sampling and kind of taking sort of disparate ideas or disparate themes and bringing them together in a way that feels fresh and unique. And what I love about this book, not to spoil anything, is that I'm not the biggest like fantasy reader. I didn't grow up like reading like Harry Potter and like Aragon and Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. And so I kind of got into a lot of that stuff later as has introduced me to it. But the book feels like part sword and sorcery, like it's almost like Fantasia through the lens of like a police procedural. Like it's just really interesting. What were some of the inspirations for this series, and maybe how the idea come about?
I mean, yeah, like I think first, I think I'm the same as you, and the way the idea came about is I'm just like I find fantasy to be so dry and hard to get into sometimes, where it's just like, we're the fucking high elves and we're doing this. It's just so, I like nerdy shit, but sometimes the fantasy stuff is just too much for me. And I certainly don't say that to insult anyone who's really into it, but I was interested in making a a, a fantasy story that people like myself and you could engage with, which is to say it would be more grounded and be, a little more accessible. And so, I had this I the kernel of the idea was is 10 years old or even older, where I was really interested in this idea of there being like a hidden world beneath ours, right? Because I think that's like the coolest part of the Harry Potter stuff, is just a suggestion that like right underneath us, or if you step in the right spot at the train station, you can go to this other place, which is kind of hidden from most of us. And so I was really interested in that, but 10 years ago I didn't have it wasn't fully cooked, and so I just like let it simmer. And then I was going through a period about maybe like 2 years ago, where I kind of was reading and experiencing a bunch of interesting sort of fantasy adjacent storytelling uh at once. And so I was kind of experiencing I was reading East of West, right? Which I thought it's basically a fantasy story, kind of meets manga, meets it's a soup of fantasy, science fiction, Western.
Mhm.
It's super manga inspired, like I find everything Nick Dragotta does is very inspired by this mangaka named Nihei, who's does the big towers and cybernetic arm guys and stuff. If anyone's watched this hasn't uh checked out his stuff, you should just Google the guy. The visuals are crazy. But so I was reading East to West, and then I played The Witcher, which is where I kind of got the procedural idea for this, because what I found so interesting about playing The Witcher, Witcher 3 to be specific, was like it's basically a procedural but set in a fantasy world, right? So these witchers go out and I don't know if you've played it or familiar with it, but he's basically like kind of like a monster hunter in this fantasy world, which is a more high fantasy world, but like he'll help the townspeople if, someone goes missing, that he has to, find it. And it's like, look, we find him in a cave and it's a werewolf versus this thing. And it's so I got interested in the idea of like doing that, but like in our world, right? Where it's like, okay, it's got procedural storytelling and is solving mystery, but like when he's solving it, it's like, oh yeah, a fucking werewolf or a vampire broke through and like fucking murdered someone in this town, right? And so it's like when he solves it, you get that it's just so interesting, right? It's like you said, it's not something I feel like's really been done to death, of like, oh, it's a fantasy procedural, right? So it's like I just thought that was really interesting to me. And then the other thing I found interesting about the story was building out the history, right? Like, what's the history of these two worlds, and like, what's the agreement like? And sort of like, I haven't read number one in a while, uh, and sort of, I think one of my favorite parts is just that after the sort of title spread, when we get into the history, and I think seeing how the history of their world brushes up against ours, and like the moments where it brushes up, is I just think it's a cool sort of fertile ground for storytelling. And so it's just putting all these different things that I found fascinating into the container of one story, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like you said, there's fantasy, there's procedural, there's like historical fiction there. Um, And
very manga inspired too, right? Like uh like so it's inspired by Berserk. Have you read Berserk?
I have not read Berserk.
Well, you should check it out. It's insane. But Berserk has a giant fucking sword and
Mhm.
there's like crazy just fights and monsters and stuff in it, right? And Berserk was sort of one of those foundational mangas that was so like epic and crazy. It didn't just inspire other mangas, it inspired, like video games and stuff like Final Fantasy that also influenced Lost Fantasy can be traced back to Berserk. So I was kind of like pulling from so many different places with this one,
Mm.
and it's kind of like I think I want to and I was doing another interview about this recently. And I was saying I want to do comics that like anyone from anywhere in the world will find cool, right? So
Yeah.
like I want to like that's the problem with American comics, I really feel like, is it's so we're so like up our own asses to kind of be crass about it, where it's just everything has to be superhero or the superhero flavor, this that. It's like but they have so much healthier markets in Japan and like France and Europe for graphic storytelling. And it's like, well, why is that? And I feel like it's a big reason is because all the storytelling medium isn't tied to one genre, right? Like American comics, you say that to anyone, they're just thinking superheroes. But in France and Japan, it's like they really understand that this storytelling can be anything. And so I think with this project and a lot of my projects moving forward, I want to make something that's going to be appeal to like everyone and not just American, Wednesday Warriors, who I love too, but I'm just saying we got to grow the comics market.
Yeah, for sure. I think what, like 12 episodes ago, I spoke with Anya Morsovo. Hopefully, I'm saying her name correctly, but she was the artist on Barbarella, and most recently, and she's from Russia originally, and she had done some stuff from like 2000 AD and like some other publishers, but like Barbarella is basically her American comics debut. But we got into chatting just about like, well, how did you discover comics if you weren't really reading American stuff like that? And she was just telling me about just the breadth of genres and the types of stories and how things are just so different there. Like there's a huge indie scene in different parts of Europe. Um, like the stuff that we have to go to like these little cons to find here in America is like sort of commonplace. Like you kind of walk into any Barnes and Noble equivalent overseas and see like stuff that'll just kind of blow your mind. And I thought that was super interesting. So I'm hoping that at some point in the American market, we can get to those types of levels as well. Um, you were describing Lost Fantasy, and even as I'm recounting like how the book reads, it almost reminds me of like Men in Black. Like if the space aliens that are hiding in New York City in Men in Black were like fantasy characters and beasts and like wizards and stuff like that. Like it's almost got that kind of vibe as well. Like was that an inspiration or is that just kind of coincidence?
So that is Men in Black wasn't on my mind when I was first sort of working on it, but there's once I got into the book, there was a problem I had to solve
Hmm.
where started thinking Men in Black. I forget how many chapters I sent you. I think maybe I sent you the first three.
Hmm.
Uh, and like there's a what they do after someone from our world witnesses uh one of the creatures or something that was very inspired by Men in Black because I'm like I have to have some sort of answer to like what the fuck happens if you're out getting your groceries and you see like a troll and like you see our guy like fighting it, right? And
Hmm.
so that was inspired by Men in Black, but sort of like a weird uh my version of it's a little like kind of weird and also inspired by uh Blade Runner 2049, the like the conditioning. Anyways, this will make no sense to people until they read a bit more. But
Right.
it was inspired by Men in Black. It's inspired by like a lot of different things uh, at different moments.
That is awesome. I guess, like, I should be a responsible member of the press and give a sort of pitch for Lost Fantasy. So, long ago, right there, like Kurt said, there's like a world hidden beneath our world, and basically what started to happen is like these monsters would come out of these portals and freak people out, like from all points in history. So when the American government, or when like the world's governments kind of found out about it, they sort of made this treaty with all these different representatives of these fantasy kingdoms, so to speak, to basically keep it so the two worlds never should meet. But something's going on, something, so every now and then something might happen, and there's these different events that have to be hidden. But as we're dropped into sort of present day, there is like an FBI agent that is basically investigating these sort of otherworldly encounters, and having to kind of manage the fallout from when these different uh, creatures or beings sort of escape into our world and wreak havoc in ways, right? I think the way I'm describing it might make it sound a little comedic. It's not. The first issue, gosh, I don't want to spoil anything, but it's just like it's super action packed. It's like you feel like the world might fall apart. Like people are in danger. Like what is going on? Like it's almost like kind of reminds me a little bit of like the opening to Something's Killing the Children, like in that way, where it's like you understand that this threat is super like sinister, um, and but also our title character, or our main sort of, I guess, protagonist, if you will, is not like the most virtuous person in the world either. And so it's like, how is this guy going to sort of solve this problem for these worlds? And just what kind of adventure are we going on? That's all I can say about the first issue without spoiling anything. But I really want you to go to the shop Wednesday and grab it.
Yeah, that's a really good pitch. I think, like you said, uh it's about that there being a hidden, magic world beneath ours where stuff breaks through, right? And there's these big creatures like trolls or werewolves, vampires, dragons, whatever. And that we show sort of the human cost of what happens when that breaks through, right? Like you're saying something killing children. It's not pretty when one of those monsters gets out, and it's not pretty when one of our creatures breaks through. And so it's about the agents and sort of law enforcement officials that are supposed to stop that and sort of like cover it up, right? And
Mm,
so our way into it is there's this sort of a mass casualty incident in Montana that's sort of, raises the alarm bells, and so this rookie agent, Henry Blackheart, who's like you said, rough around the edges, not a saint, but is kind of a brilliant young agent, is sent to investigate it. And the more he investigates it, the more he realizes that like there's more going on in this small town than sort of he initially thought, and it sort of has ties to a big mystery that involves the sort of like institution he works for and stuff. So that element, even though there's like dragons and monsters and stuff, kind of also draws influence from like True Detective or like like David Fincher movies, right? Where it's
mm,
like a messed up detective trying to solve, this huge crime or something. So it's like there's so many different influences all over this thing that kind of I think together make it, I think a really unique experience. Like I don't think anyone's going to be reading this and be like, well, I've read this one before. It's like, nah, this is I think, very unique story, and it's really suited for the medium of comics. I mean, there's just panels in it where I feel like Luca's just really channeling like Magnola and stuff, and I think it's just really fun to see him cut loose on this book.
for sure. No, it's an awesome book. Like I said, I've only read the first chapter so far because kids running around. But I this is one of those moments where I'm so excited that I get to preview things a little bit ahead of time because man, you guys don't know what you're missing out on. So please go to the shop Wednesday and grab it. But Kurt, before we go, you've got quite a few irons in the fire. You've got quite a few stories upcoming. You did tease a little bit of the John Romita Jr. project you're working on for Distillery, but before that, you've got a book coming in July called Galactic. What is this book about?
Yeah, so Galactic, the same way with Lost Fantasy, I wanted to tell a fantasy story that would be grounded and interesting to me as someone who's like a more casual fantasy person. I wanted to sort of do that with science fiction storytelling, which I think is another overdone and a lot of the time very stale genre of storytelling, right? Like how many Blade Runner riff-offs do we need? Uh, but so for this one, I was really interested in like I said, doing something grounded, and then I was kind of talking to Distillery about it, so I wanted to be really, cinematic and like widescreen for their format, right? Because basically the IMAX of comics, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and so it's sort of like it's kind of a criminal love story, like true romance, uh smashed against like Star Wars. So it's about this pair of bounty hunters. Our main character, who's Jack, he's sort of an orphan, uh, and his bounty hunting partner, whose name is Wolf, and he's a humanoid. What's it? Morky. He's based off my dog,
Hmm.
also named Wolf. I was basically like, what if my dog was Chewbacca? Anyways, so that they're sent to bring in this princess who's run away from home. Basically, like, what if Princess Leia like went on a bender? She's been on this, ran away from her palace, has been on this hippie planet, like drinking, experimenting with drugs, experimenting with her sexuality. They go to bring her home, and she hates them, they hate her, and then they kind of end up in the middle of this giant intergalactic war. And maybe they fall in love along the way, maybe they don't, but it's like a very grounded human kind of romance story against the backdrop of this, Dune Star Wars type shit. So it's like you have really human moments, you have really violent moments, you have crazy sci-fi moments where there's, women piloting starships with their, cables coming out of their brains, and just all this like comic book shit mixed with like I think grounded human storytelling, which uh is really important to me. So that one's out in July through Distillery, and I'm very excited about it as well. I think like if you like Lost Fantasy, you'll dig this one as well. It's definitely got kind of like shared DNA, like I was talking about earlier. And then yeah, later after that, we're doing the book with Johnny Ramita, which is dream come true. And he's uh one of my other early comics that I didn't really talk about too much
Hmm.
was his run with JMS, right? And particularly my favorite Spider-Man issue of all time, I think, is 500, which John worked on with his father, and it's like Peter teaming up with Uncle Ben in some kind of like afterlife type thing. I have to read it again, but anyways, it's really the story I wrote most of the scripts before John was attached, and it was like kind of like when you go to an actor on like a movie, when you write your movie, when you have your Godfather, and you're like, I want Marlon Brando for it, and so you go over to Marlon's house, and you're trying to get him to do it, and this was, I spent many months trying to get John to do this, me and Chip, who's the chief creative officer of Distillery. And just when we'd sort of given up, uh, he came and was like, I want to do this. He's like, I'm obsessed with this. So it's like literally I could make a documentary about the fucking getting John Romita for this one, and maybe I will once the when we're putting the book out, because it's
Hmm.
like a really special book. But yeah, that book's gonna blow people away. It's really it's his first creator owned since Kick-Ass, and it's a book for superhero fans who want to remember what it was like to like read that first Spider-Man comic, or really like I don't know, just I feel like it's the best thing I've ever done. So I could talk about it and I'd get in trouble, but that's what a little bit on that one.
Got you. Has the name of that series been made public yet?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I will leave that as a question mark, a teaser for your next appearance on the show, because I'd love to have you back to talk about it once we are clear to promote it.
Oh yeah, we'll do it for sure.
Awesome. Awesome. So, one question I wanted to ask you, because, we touched on it, right? You haven't done a ton of like big two work, but you've been putting out stories for quite some time. And I'm curious, like, just with you having so many like original ideas, how it is finding partners to publish these stories, whether it's creative partners to help bring them to life, or then publishers to then go and distribute these stories. How hard has that been to sort of bring these things into the marketplace?
I think it depends. It's like kind of like, I think with uh it's hard to get started, right? It's
Mhm.
really hard to get started. And I think, what I was talking about earlier about not wanting to do stuff that isn't good, for lack of a more nuanced way of talking about it, is because you spend a lot of time building your brand or your body of work as a storyteller, right? And it's really more or less all you have. And so if you start to stink for a period of time, you lose your luster and you people lose interest in reading your work. It's just something that happens. When I'm saying this, I guarantee you're thinking of someone in your head who you've experienced that with.
Mhm.
Uh, and so it's really just a lot of work over extended period of time to make really good books, and then also figuring out the angle of, okay, how do I make the book sell? What works, what's that? And that's something that a lot of creatives don't even want to engage with. But I'm like, because I didn't have necessarily the luxury of having that Marvel or DC paycheck coming in, I'm like, well, I have to figure out a way to make the book sell. And it's like all the I used every trick I've learned in the last 10 years to promote Lost Fantasy, and the numbers were very good on it. And this is a time when comics are not selling very well outside of a few monster hits.
Mhm.
And so that's sort of a really roundabout way of answering your questions, but it's like I've really devoted a lot of time to figuring out some of the business stuff, because I felt like sort of the way in the music industry how they like to trick young guys, right? Especially like rappers. Well, they give you that deal where you've never seen so much money in your life, but then they basically just, they own you forever, right? Like the
Right.
360 deal. Uh, and so there's a lot of that shit in comics too, where it's like, yeah, we'll give you, a terrible paycheck, but you're making money, do something you love, and you'll take it. And then, later on, you figure out all the ways you got fucked. And
Mhm.
so I basically learned the business side of it over the 10 years I've been doing it as well. And then the other thing which made it easier for me to get projects greenlit was I just started going out and trying to sell them in Hollywood, because I realized a lot of the guys who I was working with who, weren't talented, and not my collaborators, the executives at some of the companies who I don't no longer work with. They were
Mhm.
like wannabe producers, and they like weren't particularly skilled or like successful. And I'm just like, well, if these guys are going out and like selling shit as TV shows and movies and stuff, I can just do that. So I
Mhm.
just flew out to LA and started just like networking and like getting meetings and stuff. And I started selling that stuff. And then once you sell a couple of those things, suddenly the guys who don't want to return your calls are like a little more interested. And it's just kind of like it's like a 360-degree thing, but it's like all these little things over time build up. But I think it all really comes down to like deeply caring about uh the stories I tell, and deeply caring about the readers, where I don't want people to buy something and feel like ripped off or like not enjoy it, right? Because I still read comics, and I still, you know, experience that once in a while. I just think, wow, like you couldn't come up with a cliffhanger for that one or something, So I just think I never want to be that book in your stack that you regret spending, $5 on now. So I think it's like all those factors together is how it you do it. It's a lot of work.
For sure. But you've definitely carved out a lane. You've been successful with it, right? We've got projects with all sorts of publishers. We got Dark Horse, Mad Cave. You've had a great relationship with Comixology, right? Like it started with a few titles and they keep extending you. Um, how has that relationship been helpful to you? What's it meant to you, I should say?
Yeah, it's cool. I think like Comixology was interesting because the one of the first things I was telling you when I started going shopping things around myself as a producer, one of the first things that I set up was the our earlier project we developed with Amazon called Youth, which was like a sort of a teen superhero thing. And uh that was sort of easier to get in the door and get that meeting at Amazon Studios because of Comixology being a part of Amazon than like just coming out the street. So I think like yeah, is a relationship that's been fruitful for both of us, and I've certainly like appreciate what they do, and I'm always rooting for all the Comixology books. I want them to be great, and so yeah, I'm always wishing the best for those folks, and I'm fond of them.
For sure. Awesome. Well, like I said, man, you've got a lot going on. We've got a lot of books that, some have been announced, some haven't been announced. And so you've got an open invitation. I'm really excited about Lost Fantasy. And I think after this book, right, like a lot of people are going to be really anticipating your next project as well. So I can't wait to have you back on to discuss. But just to recap, Lost Fantasy issue number one is out this coming up Wednesday. So head to your local comic shop. And hey, if you didn't pre order it, there is a good chance or a decent chance that it may not be at your local shop. Don't worry. Just talk to your clerk. They can order it, they can reorder it. You can get yourself a copy of this book, and you definitely should.
Yes, thank you guys, appreciate it.
No problem at all. And so, for those who are interested in checking you out, where can they find you online?
I mean, that's an interesting one. I feel like all the social medias become more and more hellish.
Yeah,
But yeah, just it's my name most places. I think Instagram is probably what I'm trying to grow a bit now because it seems like the least sort of toxic.
yeah,
And so that one on there is Curt Antonio Pires, my full name. And yeah, that's where I would say, follow because everywhere else just gets the occasional update. The Instagram's a little more active.
nice, nice. Well, I'll leave links to Kurt's Instagram in the description down below and in the show notes if you're listening to the audio. And with that, man, like I said, go pre-order this book and stay safe, stay awesome, and read something dope today. Peace.